This video focuses on Epicurus, a late ancient Greek philosopher who allows us to engage the single most controversial ideas we have broached so far. For your benefit, if you desire, these are a number of ancient Greek and Roman historians to provide some context for the philosophers we've been discussing. There are a number of other ancient Greek philosophers I won't discuss, but you could investigate if you desire. Epicurus, Zeno, Euclid, and Archimedes. But specifically, let's take our time with Epicurus. Epicurus's philosophy is most fundamentally two things. One, a type of materialism in the philosophical sense, which means not the idea that material possessions bring happiness, but instead that only material things exist. The implication being that there is no immaterial soul. There is no soul at all. Once you die, that's it. No afterlife, no reincarnation, no heaven, almost certainly no gods. No devils, no angels, no demons, no hell. Just the physical realm and nothing else. Secondly, Epicurus's philosophy can be defined as a type of hedonism. Hedonism we should define as the idea that pleasure or happiness is the most important thing in life. Furthermore, that one should not pursue short-term happiness or instant gratification over long-term happiness, and that education provides the greatest happiness, and that having tranquility, equanimity, and contentment are better than living a roller coaster life with high highs and attendant low lows. Epicurus, following Plato and Socrates' lead in the Republic, provide an account of what's called the problem of evil. The problem of evil could be stated in a few ways. One, why do bad things happen to good people? Or two, if God or the gods are good, why does evil exist? Plato's Socrates had first touched upon this question in the Republic, with his disjunctive syllogism there, that either God is good or God is the creator of all things, but not both. As we investigate Epicurus's arguments regarding the problem of evil, we will also deal with what is called the free will defense. What that means is that people argue that free will is what explains why evil exists. In Renaissance Europe in the 18th century, this is Gottfried Leibniz's answer to the problem of evil. However, in our interrogation, we will have to truthfully weigh up the arguments and balance them against one another in order to determine what is persuasive and what has the most merit. Epicurus puts the problem simply this way. He asks first, is God willing to prevent evil, but not able? If God does want to stop evil, but he has not the power to stop evil, then God is not omnipotent or all-powerful. So perhaps God is able to prevent evil, but he doesn't want to. If God does have the power, but not the desire, then for Epicurus, the only logical answer allowed is that God is evil. That statement and the idea it represents is powerful, uncomfortable, uncommon, different, strange, and new. How can we deal with this radically different notion that although people constantly affirm God is good, Epicurus provides a challenging logic to escape that perhaps the opposite is true, that a God, as the author of all evil, is itself evil. It is easy to overlook how radical the logical argument finishes out rather simplistically from there. Is God both able and willing to prevent evil? If so, where does evil come from? And if God is neither able nor desiring to stop evil, why even call him God? I'd like, at this point, to spend some time picking through the implications of this argument in detail in order to determine right here and now if free will solves this apparent prison that Epicurus has constructed. Some of the questions we've already touched upon. For example, Plato had provided us with the problem of who is the author of evil originally. In our society's terms, wouldn't it have had to be God who created the devil? Knowing what that would mean? Ultimately, must not the buck and the blame go all the way to the top? If we are flawed or faulty creations, is it our fault or the fault of the Creator? I think specifically we should focus on the question of whether God could have done otherwise. Specifically, could God have created a world with free will and yet no evil? Notice that this is a variation of Epicurus's set of questions. If we say God could not have done otherwise, we seem to be expressing that God is not omnipotent. And if God could have created a world with free will and yet no evil, then the choice to create a world with free will and evil would be arbitrary. There are a few different relevant types of evil which we should discuss. First off, there would be evil spirits, demons and devils. Secondly, evil actions, evil behaviors, and evil people. Not just evils like death, but evils like rape, murder, childhood cancers, molestations, genocide. Those are the evils which supposedly free will burdens us with. But there is an even greater evil. Specifically, in Christianity, as well as Islam, this would be represented by a supernatural, torturous prison of a hell. Torture itself likely is evil. Eternal torment as described by Jesus in the New Testament, I would certainly argue also qualifies as evil. Imagine if I opened up an ice cream store and you could choose either vanilla or chocolate ice cream. And I told you, you're free to choose. But if you choose chocolate, I will have you tortured. That would in fact be coercion or blackmail. Not really even free will, if there's a threat of torture. But if I had the option of opening up that ice cream store in which there are 2 flavors and torture, or a different ice cream store in which there are 2 flavors to choose between and no one gets tortured, if I choose to create the one with torture rather than the one without, would it be accurate to call that arbitrary decision malevolent? One of the other defining features of God, or characteristics, especially in the Western world, is that God is omniscient, or all-knowing. In which case, God must have known what would happen when he gave people free will. That people would choose to use it for bad purposes. Obviously. We could compare the wisdom of a God to the wisdom of people. Perhaps similarly to the wisdom of an adult compared with the wisdom of a child. If I ran a daycare, and in my daycare, I said to the children, I'm going to leave you a choice. You can play with the Nerf guns I've provided for you, which you are welcome to do. But I'm also going to leave a loaded handgun in the room with you. And I'm going to leave that I don't want you to play with. Would that be responsible, ethical, wise, or decent? Would that even be good if I provided young children with little ability to tell right from wrong and little ability to resist temptation, with the means to destroy themselves and others? Would I not be evil if I, in a position of power and authority, ran a daycare that way? Children, compared to adults, have little grasp of right and wrong, are constantly messing up, likely in the same way that humans are compared to God. We only have slight ability compared to God to determine what we should do from what we should not. And even if we do know, we often succumb to temptation. We could reasonably ask whether or not the so-called intelligent design is really so intelligent after all. Imagine if I was designing a suspension bridge, and I knew that 50% of the cars that crossed this bridge would plunge down into the water far below, killing all the occupants of the vehicle in a horrific and terrifying way. If I knew that a significant proportion of people who used my design would come to terrible ends, would I be a good designer? This is just varieties or variations on Epicurus's malevolency. Over the years, many of my students have suggested there must be some repayment for bad deeds. That not to punish bad actions would be unjust. However, a supernatural and torturous hell does not serve any disciplinary nor educational purpose. If you tell a child, don't go play in the street, and the child disobeys, so you punish them, you're doing so that the child behaves better in the future. If an evil and torturous hell is inescapable, it serves no purpose other than revenge. Lest you are concerned that I'm running a field and inputting my own personal agenda on these questions, let me tie this back in not only to Epicurus, but to a philosopher in the early 20th century named Walter Kaufmann. Kaufmann, in a text titled Critique of Religion and Philosophy, makes the argument that if the God of Christianity is loving or just, that God is not loving or just in the way that we humans are loving or just. Now, that may be fine. For God's love to be of a different order than human love, and God's justice of a different order than human justice. Socrates' argument is that such gods might provide bad role models and bad exemplars of ethics. We'll leave that for you to consider. But Kaufmann's point is that if I said to a romantic partner, "Love me back or I will hurt you," that would not be love in any way we traditionally define it. Instead, that would much more frighteningly sound like domestic abuse. When Epicurus suggests the possibility that God, instead of being good, is in fact evil, these are the implications. Unpleasant, uncomfortable. But for philosophers, if we are to truly engage with an attempt to understand reality, these questions are unavoidable. A number of other philosophers will deal with these questions. We'll mention Leibniz as we get to the 1700s, and Pascal around that time too. Plato and Socrates, Nietzsche and Kaufmann, as well as a number of others I won't even make the effort to discuss, wrestle with these challenging issues. Before we leave them, let's at least provide the counter-argument, which is that perhaps the right answer is that God is both identical with the concept of free will, while at the same time defined by the characteristic that goodness must punish evil. That, in fact, could solve every single one of the counter-arguments I had just provided. That God's nature is that he must punish evil as well as provide free will. We might be able at this point to wash our hands of it and return to our daily business without troubling ourselves with these nagging questions. But at this point, at the very least, we've dealt with them and identified that free will alone does not by itself solve every curiosity we might have regarding the problem of evil.